Good morning. It's a pleasure to welcome you this morning to our discussion about the film The Search. I hope that you've all had a chance to see the film. This morning, we are welcoming Richard Reeder, who is going to be discussing the film. Richard, born and raised in Chicago and continues to live in the Chicago area with his wife, Ann. He was educated in the Chicago public schools, and he has 2 degrees from Roosevelt University. His multifaceted career included working as a caseworker, an elementary school worker, an employment counselor, a research assistant, and an executive in both government and social service and educational organizations. Richard, you are multi-talented. He remains active as a consultant, writer, an adult education facilitator, and instructor. And we at JCC Chicago are thrilled to have you here this morning. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, well, thank you, Eileen. So I want to get into the discussion, and thank you all for participating. But I want to talk at first, and this will help you understand the movie somewhat. I want to talk about the director, Fred Zinnemann. Fred Zinnemann, this film was released in March of 1948. And Fred Zinnemann was born in Austria. He was trained as a cinematographer in France, and he worked as a cinematographer in pre-Hitler Germany, at least pre-ascendancy of Hitler in Germany in the early 30s. He was a documentary filmmaker, documentary film. So his first films for the first 10 years of his career basically were documentaries. So, so as this film starts, it has a feel of a documentary, total feel of a documentary. It opens up, and I found the opening scene almost startling, because what do you see? You see a train with boxcars pulling up. It's jolting. This is post-Holocaust, just immediately after the camps were liberated. And you see a train pulling up. And what do you see? And there's silence, really. And you see children coming out of the train. And there's silence with the children. There's silence. And then another interesting aspect of the film is you have the narration of the film. It's coming. You have somebody who's speaking, narrating the film about what's going on, a voiceover. So it sets the tone for about the first 15 or 20 minutes of the film. So, but you have to understand Zinnemann's style. That's the style of a documentary filmmaker. Of course, Zinnemann, so this film was released in 48. Zinnemann makes the film called The Men in 1950. He directed that, and that was the debut of Marlon Brando in the role of a wounded World War II veteran. And then 2 years later, Zinnemann makes the film with Gary Cooper, High Noon. And the year after that, a film with Burt Lancaster, Frank Sinatra, Deborah Carr, From Here to Eternity. So he was a very successful Hollywood filmmaker whose career lasted over 20 years. But this film was the first in post-war Germany. It was basically filmed right after the war ended. It was filmed a little bit after the Japanese surrender. So the April surrender of the Germans, the Japanese surrender. So Europe is full of hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of displaced people. And Zinnemann was working with an organization called United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration. Now, did you notice the patches when you saw the women interviewing the children. Did you notice that patch? UNRRA. Very interesting organization. It was it was started mostly, 44 countries participated in starting it. It started in 1943 when the war was going on. Um, most of the funding and most of the staffing came from the United States. And when it was set up, it had over a $3 billion budget. The United States kicked in about $2 billion. So it was not just an American organization, but again, it was heavily funded by the U.S. and and they sent workers all throughout, not just Europe, but Asia, because don't forget that you had millions of displaced people in mostly China and Korea, in the wake of what was going on with Japanese occupation. But this film focuses, of course, in Europe. And we see the UNRWA workers, we see the children. It's a very slow paced film at the beginning. And it focuses on, of course, the young boy. He's a Czech lost child, and his name is Carol. And we see him, and he's quiet. He's not saying anything. He's quiet. He seems to have befriended one other young boy there, a French young boy by the name of Raoul, and they became friendly. And again, you hear silence, and he you wonder what his nationality is. Um, and all he can say is "Ich weiß nicht," which is "I don't know." When asked, when he's asked questions, he just says "I don't know." "Ich weiß nicht." Um, and we get introduced then to a woman who is looking for her lost son, the mother. And the actor who plays Carol, by the way, the child actor is Ivan Yandel, and Mrs. Malik was Yarmila Novotna. And we learn that, well, and when we meet Steve, that's Montgomery Clift. And this is Montgomery Clift's first movie. This is his debut, 1948. Aileen McMahon plays the UNRWA worker, and there's an interesting musical score as well. The film's kind of heats up a little bit when the children are moved, right? So they're at the facility, and they're in a barracks. They're in a former German soldier barracks. That's where the children are, and you could see early on. You can see an insignia of the German army that was in the barracks. It was kind of half erased, but you could see the swastika in the background. So imagine the emotional feelings of these children who were in concentration camps, and we see the numbers of them, right? We see the numbers, their concentration. We see the number on Carol. Now, the children, the way the film is develops, these children, some are Jewish children, others are not Jewish children. We don't quite figure out the nationalities of these children, but all we know is that they're displaced. They don't know where their parents are. They're essentially lost, and it's a situation that at least you have an organization like UNRWA that attends to their needs. And UNRWA, by the way, in the 3 years of their existence, they only existed from 1943 until 1947. And many of their functions were taken over by the United Nations. UNRWA's first director was former Governor Herbert Lehman from New York, and its second director in 1947 was former Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia of New York City. And UNRWA basically disappeared in 1947, but did a lot of great work. 700,000 people were served by UNRWA. They did a fantastic job. But getting back to the movie, um, it's the silence and it's this camp. And then there's this escape scene in the movie where the children are moved, they're afraid, they see jeeps go, they see jeeps, um, they see uh, trucks, relief trucks carrying the children, but these were trucks that the Germans, that the Nazis used. So they feared where they were going. They didn't know where they were going. They were in a concentration camp, and then they're put in trucks again, like they were put on a train in boxcars. So they have so much fear. So the little boy, the French boy, and the Czech boy, they run away, and it's a tragic scene. What happens is the the French boy drowns, and we don't know what happened to Ivan. We just find one body. So, and then there's the parallel scenario of the mother's church search for her son, and the mother the mother's frantic, and then she meets the UNRWA worker who has the clothes of her son that they found in the river. And the mother comes to the conclusion, as did the UNRWA worker, that the child was dead. But the mother, she was a woman of compassion, and she wanted to work with the organization, and she gets a job working with UNRWA. Um, and we see what's going on, with the children in these barracks that have been made into transient housing for the children. There was one scene in there that really kind of pulled, the Jewish emotion when you see these Jewish children that are learning Hebrew, and they're learning what life will be in Palestine. There wasn't Israel at that time. Israel had not begun until May of 1948. They were going to Palestine, and Mrs. Malik, the mother, was working with these children, and you just saw, you had that glimpse into what these children would be going to the new land of Palestine, what would become Israel. So there was the little Jewish component in there, but for the most part, there wasn't much Jewishness in the film at all. But it certainly is a tale of dispossessed children, children that are essentially frantic. That was that scene, the chase scene. The one child drowning in the river, the other child being lost. It's a scene of children who are just at complete emotional distress. You know, Contemporary now, you see kids at the border right now, in very similar, in the Mexican American border, and in a similar situation. So it's heartbreaking. And then, as the boy is lost, as Carol is lost, we're introduced to Steve, a soldier by the name of Stevenson, played by Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift. Um, and he just takes an interest in this kid. Of course, the kid is scared. He's a soldier. He's wearing a uniform. He's riding around in a military vehicle, and he's afraid. But eventually, Steve takes him back to his apartment. Steve is he's a part of the Army unit that builds bridges, Army engineers. He's living with his roommate, Wendell Corey plays the roommate, famous character actor in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Um, and a relationship develops with the boy and Steve. It's a very, very tender story. Um, but what's the background? We see, remember, Zinnemann is 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 a cinema, he's a cinematographer. And all these stills, all the still photography of bombed out buildings, how Berlin and how Germany looked after the war. It was just frightening. I mean, it was just, it was, and the stills lasted, sometimes the stills lasted for 10, 15 seconds. He was focusing on the destruction. So so the story's developing, though the mother is still looking for her child. And um, it goes on and goes on. Eventually, she is working for UNRWA, and eventually um, uh, there's the reunion at the end, which I found it to be extremely emotional when the mother sees her son. Um, you must remember this child came from a family where the father was a doctor in Prague. Um, the documentary, there was a little scene in when they were showing the family at home in the apartment in Prague, and there's music being played. There's a musician in the family. The mother obviously is a musician, and I don't know if you noticed, there was in the background the Moldau, the Smetana, the Czech composer. When they showed the Charles Bridge in Prague, the Moldau came in the score of the movie. So it was a movie which I believe had at the end an emotional punch. I think if there's a criticism of the movie, it was the slowness on how it developed. And perhaps it took 15 minutes, maybe some of you, it took a half an hour or maybe 45 minutes before you started really feeling the emotionalism within the movie. But I think at the end, it was powerful the way it ended. And and of course, it had a happy ending, which is always a wonderful thing with the mother being reunited with her child. The movie won some prizes during the Academy Awards and the Golden Globes. So the screenplay of the movie won an Oscar, an Academy Award. The screenplay won a Golden Globe. The the act there was a category in 1948 um, called a juvenile award for a juvenile actor, and the actor who played Carol, Ivan Yandel, won the juvenile award. So the Oscars were in March of 1949, and by that time, Ivan Yandel, the young boy, was back in Czechoslovakia, and the Czechoslovakian government had become communist, and the communists would not allow Ivan, the boy, to come to Los Angeles to accept the Oscar. They would not allow him to come. So the Oscar was accepted by Fred Zinnemann, the director. Um, the the movie also won a special category called Best Film Promoting International Understanding. So that was another prize won by the movie. And it, it launched Zinnemann's career because immediately he got to do a few other movies that I had mentioned earlier, and he was a very successful Hollywood director. Zinnemann, in about a year before the movie was released, Zinnemann found out that both his parents were killed during the Holocaust. They never left Austria. So he found out that his parents died. So It's a film that I think has a lot of relevance today because you have so many children that are out there that are homeless and displaced. But again, this was a situation of hundreds of thousands of children and worldwide millions of children after World War II. They didn't know where to go. They were fearful, um, frightened, and I think the film did an excellent job in capturing um, the, the psyche of especially those young boys and girls, and about the dangers that they were facing and about the loss that they were experiencing. Okay, so um, so I'd love now to begin a discussion with you. And are there any questions, Eileen?
Yes, there are. So Susan asked, did the USA send so much money because they had done nothing to stop what was going on in Europe until it was too late? Like, was it kind of, like, all right, we'll pay for our sins?
Well, there was always an element within the American government, the State Department. There, there was always an element. Mrs. Roosevelt, whether or not after you could criticize Franklin Delano Roosevelt, it wasn't just his policy not uh, bombing the railroad tracks in Europe that led to concentration camps, and you could criticize his executive order in entering Japanese. I mean, you had FDR and the State Department had some what turned out fairly inhuman policies. But on the other hand, you had our First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, and a lot of sympathetic people within the government who were pressing for a more humane approach to the status of refugees. So again, this started in 1943. The money allocated by the United States government to UNRWA, a couple of billion dollars, that came in during the war. So I think the intentions generally were good. And again, in the post-war, the United States took the initiative in refugee resettlement. And one thing too about UNRWA, before we take on some more questions, one thing about UNRWA as an organization, they partnered with other organizations, and in the Jewish community, for instance, they partnered with the Joint Distribution Organization, or they partnered with HIAS. They partnered, and when you saw the Jewish children being primed to go to Palestine, you saw the shaliach there, the emissary from the Jewish agency, from the Sochnut. So, yeah, so the American government was stepping forward, and yeah, I guess there were some sins and some blood on the part of the American government and Roosevelt administration. But for the most part, I think the American effort in refugee relief was positive. Eileen,
Um,
some other questions.
yeah. Susan also wanted to know, was this based on a true story? I mean, I think it could have been based on a true story. There must have been stories like it.
Yeah, I think it's a composite. I think more it was a composite. You talk about, they used to say about the naked city, there's 8 million stories in the naked city. Well, think about it, they're probably with refugee children post World War II, there were probably 5 million or 6 million stories. But this I believe that the screenplay was a composite.
So Heidi wants to know, the movie was filmed at the same time the events were actually going on. How did they make that happen? Write a script so quickly, get into, like get into war-torn Berlin, get the international actors into Berlin. It seems like an impossible feat, she said.
Well, it wasn't easy. And don't forget, there were 4 sectors within Europe. There's the American sector, British sector, Russian sector, French sector. So you had to cooperate with each of the sectors. Most of this was filmed in the American sector, by the way. So that made things easier. So yeah, you had Fred Zinnemann was quite well known. He had been working already about 8 or 9 years in Hollywood. He knew a lot of European people in film as well. He worked in Germany for a couple of years. He got some of his former colleagues who somehow survived the war. He brought in a couple of his French um, colleagues from his cinematography days in Paris. So he was on the continent. And he could put together a team very quickly. And and again, children's refugee relief was a passion for him, and he really wanted to make this film. So he worked with the screenwriters intensively to get this thing done quickly.
Susan Sherman wants to know, were any of the producers, writers, actors involved in the film Jewish? Like
Um,
little boy Jewish?
um, but there were there were four, I think there were 3 or 4 producers. I believe there was one Jewish producer. I'm not quite sure. By the name, I think it was a Jewish producer. And of course, Zinnemann was Jewish.
Right. But the actors not.
None. No, no Jewish actors. And again, the mother was a Czech actress who had been living in London. Um, the poor woman left Czechoslovakia and lived in London during the Blitz, but
What?
she was a distinguished woman she was a stage performer in Czechoslovakia, distinguished stage performer as well as a movie actress. But no, none of the main actors, at least, were Jewish.
And Debbie wants to know, do you think the real refugee workers were that cold and stone-faced with the children, clueless about trauma and PTSD? She hopes not. But but from everything, from all the films that I see, um, it almost seemed to me like the relief workers, unless they actually saw what had happened at the camps, like first, like they just could not even understand. They couldn't understand the trauma. They couldn't imagine it.
Well, again, they couldn't imagine it. They couldn't imagine it. And I don't think that these UNRWA workers were trained uh, social workers and psychologists, and I don't think they had that kind of training. I think they were well-intentioned people who wanted to help out with a humanitarian crisis. I don't think they were having much professional training when they got into a situation where they saw all these traumatized children before them. And maybe it was a coping mechanism, uh, and maybe Zinnemann, as the director, maybe he saw that as a coping mechanism. How do you deal with so much with these children who saw slaughter unfold in front of their eyes, being tattooed, treated like cattle? These workers, I think it was a coping mechanism for them to come across cold, objective. It was That's the way I take it.
We're gonna, as part of the film festival in the early fall, we're going to show, it's a 6-part television program from the Swiss.
Mhm.
And it talks about a group of survivors that were sent to Switzerland after the war for like rehab. And the Swiss are expecting these young children, little children they're expecting. So it's
Mhm.
almost set up like like preschool, and off the bus come young men. Um, and they're like, but we were expecting children. Like this isn't what we signed up for, kind of a thing. And 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 the man from the relief agency says, that's traveling with them, said those babies, they didn't survive. Like, you know, and so that's why this question kind of resonated with me, because the way that they treated the survivors in the Swiss camp, and this is based on true stories, it was kind of stone-faced and
Yeah.
cold. So let's see, we have more questions. We have Bill and Leslie, who said there's a wonderful interview done with Mr. Zinnemann in 1993, and they watched it and it was very insightful. And they said, if interested, you can look up Film Talk 1993, Fred Zinnemann. So that's really something that does interest me. Susan asked, can you tell us again what UNRWA means, what it stands for?
Okay, it's a long name. It's the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration. And it was founded in 1943, before the founding of the United Nations, which was created in the San Francisco Conference of 1945. It was independent of the United Nations, even after 45. It was its own NGO, non-governmental organization, although it was funded heavily by the United States. I think the total budget, $3.7 billion, 2.7 from the US, 625 million from the UK, and 139 million from Canada.
Lots of money, lots of money.
Back in 1943, 44.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Leslie is saying that the interview that she watched was very interesting, and that Zinnemann, like with capital letters, like he wanted quality movies to be made. And so, I recommend, if anybody's interested, that they look that up and watch the interview online. And
Just pop the link to the interview into the chat box.
Thanks,
Oh,
Hillary.
great. Thank you. Thanks, Hillary.
Heidi is saying that she had the privilege of discussing the movie with another attendee yesterday, and that they disagreed on their sentiment about the ending. Heidi thought it was a cruel way to reunite a mother and son, and she thought it was reasonable and a good way to confirm identity. And she asked what the group thinks. So,
well, yeah.
So, I mean, we're not that big of a group. So if you want to unmute yourself and share what you think about the ending.
Excellent idea. Let's get some people talking.
Okay.
I see Susan's hand.
Okay.
I just think it was just too bizarre that a mother is wandering all these places by herself. She seemed educated, but obviously there was no technology at the time, and winds up in this place that she's going to leave, but then she stays. It was just, I don't know.
It's Hollywood, Susan. Happy ending.
I know.
Right?
But when I get so invested in something, whether it's a movie or a book or a reality show, I think it's all real. So.
And you see so much tragedy. You see the tragedy on their faces. Aren't you for a happy ending?
Yeah.
And it was a 71.
Absolutely, but
yeah, it was
a little bit out there.
It was sudden and contrived. You're saying, Abby?
Okay.
Well, but I think you have to, till this day, people who find each other after 70 years, siblings who were separated in in Europe 70 years ago, and they find each other today. There's just such coincidences. I've led Israel trips where, just casually talking to someone, and I find out they're my cousin, or another cousin who did some genealogy, had a meeting at her house, and I walked in, and 3 of the women who were there, I later found out were my cousins are people that one was a colleague and two that I was friends with in Northbrook. Like, it just never came up. So I think these coincidences, I know it's Hollywood, but I feel like these coincidences, thank God they happen. And, it was a movie. So, and they did try to, they did find that son who wasn't hers, before she found her son.
Right.
So,
Right.
that was kind of like, you didn't think it was going to end so well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's, the Ford, like, the movie was made a long time ago.
Oops.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. But I think the scenes, I think the scenes were jarring. The still photography and seeing the runes. There was the scene of lice, lice, and seeing
It's covered.
the
Yeah.
hair, being removed from the hair. Um,
The
it,
scene
it
of
had
the scene of the boy drowning.
scene of and the
Oh,
hat, just the hat kind of floating. And but then I think the child actor Ivan was wonderful. I thought he was a wonderful actor. I don't know how he was. I think he was trained as an actor in Prague. He had parents who trained, who sent him to acting school, and Zinnemann found him. I thought he was wonderful. That scene with the shoes. Remember the scene with the shoes?
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
Uh, just a wonderful scene. What about Montgomery Clift? What about the character of Steve? What do you think about him? Did he come across? Was it a realistic character? Was he corny? Was he too corny? Too phony? Or was he coming across sincere? What do you think?
I don't,
Anybody?
um, I haven't seen many movies with Montgomery Clift, and I think it was a very different part for him. I think for his first movie, of course, they didn't have an idea of how he could act and do that. He seemed very sincere about it, but I don't know if I enjoyed the acting as much as I would have with maybe a bit older actor. I don't know. I don't know.
Debbie's comment is that he seems sincere to her. Look, to me, you can't imagine how you would feel when you were faced with that situation. It's such an unreal situation. And you watch, like, even today, when you compare it to what we're watching play out on television today with the refugees, you see those reporters who are going to the border and they're being confronted, with these children and the issues these children are facing. And they're also like, they are so overwhelmed with emotion. And so you can only imagine what it would be like to be in that situation. Diane says she thought Steve was a little corny, but she liked the interaction of him and Carol. She thought it was so playful and tender.
Hmm.
And she thought the music during their interaction was fun and energetic. And Heidi thought that he was lovely and charming.
Mhm.
Donna said that Steve seemed to be a boy himself, which is probably very true about the soldiers at that time.
Yeah. Now remember what when was the last time that Carol, the boy, saw his mother before the reunion, before the search? What
Mm,
what do you remember when the last time was? Does anybody recall that?
It was in the camp. It
In the
was
camp, and she was behind a fence. And
Right?
every time as the film progressed, there were several times when he saw a fence. Like there was this one thing where the women were coming out of a factory. Remember when he before he met Steve, when he after he escaped and he was running around, he saw these women leaving a factory. And they were walking out with their pails, right? But he saw the fence. They were walking out of a fence, and he was thinking, he was searching for his mother because he associated the fence. So think about it, this young kid, he was in a camp and he didn't know, was this a factory? Was this another concentration camp? Think about, I thought that that imagery was very effective.
And when he became friendly with the other little boy, I can't remember his name.
Yeah.
Right. And they brought up the word mother. And he started thinking, and then he ran upstairs and suddenly he's drawing lines,
Yeah.
horizontal and then vertical. And that's when he really remembered what a mother was.
Mhm.
And that's when he ran away.
Yeah, so one has to wonder, okay, so this film was released in 1948, it's a long time ago,
Mhm.
21. Uh, is the film still relevant today? Does it not, does it create an emotional punch with you today? What's the
Well,
feeling?
sure. Like Eileen said, with all the immigrant children, it's just unbelievable to see they came from horror and now they're living again in this place that was maybe in their minds supposed to take care of them. And I mean, there's so many now that it's, I'm sure, very hard for the government to grasp it. The government now, as opposed to the government before, is doing their best, but it's like a repeating cycle.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No,
In refugee camps, there's still millions of people, adults and children in refugee camps.
Mhm.
So, the
Right.
world is still a mess.
I just wanted to say one of the reasons that we chose this film was because of something that we had seen online. There were two things that kind of pointed us in this direction. One was an article about identifying the million names or the million names of the victims of the Holocaust, the Jewish victims of the Holocaust that are still unknown. So right now at Yad Vashem, they have 4.5 million names that are documented through testimony of people who perished in the Holocaust. And that leaves us with 1 million or more of names of people who have perished and their fate is unknown.
Mhm.
So how, and this whole idea of like tracing people or the documentation, we've thought was still really relevant today, since there aren't that many people left to provide this documentation. So that was one aspect. And the second aspect is, I know this is an older film and maybe it's not going to be enjoyed by a 18 to 39-year-old audience, but we had also read some data about how people in that age group don't even know that there were 6 million Jewish victims or 17 million killed in the entire war, and they'd never really heard of the Holocaust or this kind of persecution. So, while the film is old, I think I love the not love, but like they aren't using sets, they're using the actual ruins of post-war Germany.
Mhm.
And it's just a good reminder to anybody on this call or anybody that you know that we should document and give testimony about these names, because that's how we're going to remember the people.
Yeah. It must have been an interesting discussion whether or not they should make the film kind of a universal, universal dispossessed children, lost children, rather than featuring with the Jewish children. Um, it kind of reminds me a little bit about the decision of making the Diary of Anne Frank more of a universal theme than a Jewish theme. Meyer Levin, who was a very prominent Jewish author, uh, he he apparently got the right handshake agreement with Otto Frank in 1945 to basically make the film a Jewish film, because there were excerpts in Anne's diary that talked about Eretz Israel and a definite Zionist identity with Anne, but that did not get into eventually a group that was put together, an investment group that I think Lily Hellman was involved in putting the group together, got the rights for the diary, and it had a universal theme rather than a Jewish theme. And I thought there might have been a discussion. I don't know if Zinnemann talked about that in that interview, but there might have been a discussion before the film was put together, whether it should focus on the Jewish children rather than all the refugee children. So it was just, to me, it resonated with the whole discussion about the Anne Frank diary situation.
But you have to wonder if it had just focused on the Jewish, if it had just been a focus on a Jewish child, as opposed to more broad, the Anne
Yeah.
Frank, film, would it have had the impact that it's had
Yeah,
for so long and
yeah,
it continues to resonate? So,
yeah.
I mean, you do have to wonder about that. When we were watching Jojo Rabbit, when we were screening Jojo Rabbit last year,
Hmm.
we were screening it with the distributor, okay? And somebody from the distributor after the film said, I wonder what the audience is going to look like. Because he said, I think that it's going to be a specific interest audience, and it will not get a broad audience. And I kind of think that was true.
Mhm.
I do think it was, it was
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And so, you have to wonder about what, making things specifically Jewish, or, making things broader if it's going to have a bigger impact,
Mhm.
you know.
Somebody, yeah, thank you, thank you. That's excellent point, Celine. Somebody asked the question, why didn't he just make a documentary? Why, why is he making a feature film about this? I think it had to do with, well, it had to do with bottom line. You're going to make more money. You're going to have a wider audience. I think, you're going to get distribution into a whole theater network with a featured film, as of documentaries are very limited in distribution. So I think that's why, there was a financial incentive, but I think also the incentive to have it out there to a larger audience. So rather than thousands could see it, perhaps millions could see it. So I think that's why it was made a feature film.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Um, and Donna said she believes that the film holds up well. She thought it was well done with camera angles and the lighting, especially when the children were running away from the ambulance and the trucks with the natural ruins like behind them. Like, she just thought it was well made,
Hmm. Right.
you know. And by the way, I don't know if everybody's following the chat, but Bill and Leslie said that the little Czech boy did not know English. He was taught phonetically the lines.
Right.
And he was so believable in this role. So,
Yeah,
you know, that's so interesting because last year we showed the Song of Names and we met with Francois Girard to talk about the film. And we talked about the little boy who starred in that film. And he said that the star, the young man who played like the violinist, he played the violin, but he didn't speak. He had never acted before. So they had to teach him acting. But what was important was that they didn't have to teach him violin. So it's interesting how they pick these
Yeah.
child actors.
right.
You know, like what a producer director looks for in a child actor. But it was fascinating to me that this little boy did not speak English.
Yeah. And one of the things too, you know, so much of there were no subtitles when the children were talking. You know, that French boy was speaking French, there were a lot of Polish kids there. They're speaking, you know, both Jewish and non-Jewish kids speaking Polish, and there's no subtitles. So unless your French is good and your Polish is good, you don't know what these kids are saying. So I think that was a defect in the movie. I wish they would have, you know, would have had subtitles for that. I think that would have helped. And I think too, in just my critique of it, I think the pacing wasn't good. I think it was too slowly paced at the
At
beginning.
the beginning.
Yeah, at the beginning. So it was not a great film. Now, I think anybody who saw High Noon and saw Zinnemann at his best, you could say that was a great film. And in interviews with Zinnemann, he also, you know, there's all kinds of moral choices in that. You know, nobody's supporting this guy, the the the, uh, the Gary Cooper character, and he acts on his own because sometimes decisions have to be made that you have to act on your own, an existential choice. So yeah, Zinnemann had a tremendous career. This was, you know, this film was, you know, this film was greatly appreciated and lauded, but it wasn't a perfect film. There's no doubt about it.
So Abby says that a reiteration of the film was made in 2014, and it takes place in the front lines of the Russian invasion of Chechnya.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and it's available because when we were searching for the search,
Yeah.
like when we were trying to figure out how to get the rights, that definitely comes up. And so, yes, you can absolutely get that.
It won a prize, the reiteration.
Yeah, it did.
Abby, is it the same name, The Search?
Called The Search. It's a French film. And it won Palme d'Or, or competed for one.
Oh, okay.
I've never heard of any of the directors, producers, actors that are in it.
Yeah.
It's in English, French, Russian, and Chechen.
Interesting. One of the comments was that was a wonderful relationship, even though they didn't understand their languages, but between Carol and Raoul, you know, between our Czech boy and the French boy, that being children can develop a relationship even without understanding the words that they're speaking. So I thought that was extremely moving, that relationship.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So, Avi, one last comment. Avi liked the fact that there were so many.
Bill, did you want to say something? I see Bill.
Yeah.
Bill.
Yes, I think getting back to the ending, I think it's reasonable that they would have located the mother, even had she taken the train. They would have left word at all the right places. that she would be likely to go and they would have found her. That doesn't work. That doesn't work for Hollywood. So they had a more dramatic ending. But plus the ending had a moral thing. I mean, she only got what she wanted when she was giving back to others.
Excellent point. Excellent point. She didn't have to stay if, you know, she assumed that it was presumed that her son was dead, but she had the compassion. She wanted to do that kind of work. She felt the need. That was an excellent point.
Good point.
Mhm.
Good point, Nelson.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, so the final comment was that Avi said that he liked the fact that there were no subtitles, Richard, because when the kids spoke their native language, because it put the viewer in the same position as the UNRWA people, because they also didn't speak the language and didn't understand the children.
Well, they know UNRWA. Well, UNRWA had translators. Didn't you say they had they did have local translators? So yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So
I don't know. Sometimes I feel like when they show a movie and it's about like Germany and everybody speaking English, that also bothers me. Like, but I don't mind subtitles. So for people who don't like subtitles, they prefer to watch it in
true.
English. But I do always think that it's better when it's when it's in the regular, like in the language of the people.
Yeah.
So everybody, thank you so much for joining us. This was so much fun. It was nice to unmute and to hear people
Yes.
talk. It felt more like being in a movie theater, which is absolutely where we prefer to show film and the way that we prefer to do the film festival. But I want to make sure to say that we really are very thankful to the Israel Engagement Fund. It's a JCC, Association of North America program that's made possible by the generosity of several committed donors, and really made it possible for us to be able to present this film, to present the discussion this afternoon with Debbie Krupkin, who's on with us this morning, about Jewish genealogy, and about for the program with the Weiner Museum, which will really be focused on those 1 million+ people who we have not identified. So thank you very much for joining us. Everybody have a wonderful day. Richard, thank you so much. I wasn't sure how I felt about the film, but I feel very differently about it walking away after this afternoon. I actually am going to watch it again. I often watch it again after a discussion. So thank you very much for joining us.
Okay. Bye,
Everybody
everyone.
have a wonderful day. Bye.
Bye-bye.